Fog lay on the Lorraine like a lie that wanted to be believed. It clung to hedgerow stumps and half-ditched fences, making ranges feel shorter and nerves feel longer. Arracourt, September 19, 1944. Fields wet, engines grumpy, every crewman a student of noises. In Charlie Company's line, an M4 Sherman idled in second gear on a low reverse slope, while its crew argued with physics and fear. The morning brief had preferred words like screen, delay, and harass, all of which are synonyms for "you are going to be outnumbered, and you may not get to choose how." 800 yards out, the number guessed and then confirmed by a sliver of sun that found a turret face. 2 Panzer IVs rolled into view with the smug geometry of men who had practiced their approach. 2 more followed in echelon, patient, like wolves that had read each other's diaries. Inside the Sherman, the commander lowered his binoculars and said the only sentence that had any value: "We fight." Gunner Corporal Lewis thumbed the elevation wheel as if trying to convince it to remember how his fingers felt when they weren't cold. The M70G sight drew a crosshair on gray that kept moving. Driver Ortiz braced the hull with the track against earth, a trick that turned recoil into cooperation. Radio crackled with other people's troubles. 2 o'clock, 800, the commander said, his voice steady because steadiness is the cheapest luxury in war. AP up. Loader PFC. Walter Kowalski had been a replacement yesterday. Today he was the only man in the turret whose job could not be paused. He swung to the ready rack, pulled an M61 APC round, 15-odd pounds of answer, and felt his left shoulder argue with the motion. On a patrol the night before, he had slipped in a ditch and tried to catch himself with a joint that didn't vote yes. It had been ugly then, a wet, private pain he refused to share with men who needed his arm more than he needed a doctor. Now, as the Panzer IVs steadied, the joint became a snag in the turret's tight dance. He set the round on the cradle and tried to ram it home. The shoulder screamed, the breech gaped, seconds thinned. Manuals imagine a calm room and 2 good arms. The M4's turret imagined that too, until the day insisted on a revision. Walter felt the arithmetic of death tap him on the back. 800 yards is near enough that the first man to put steel where it matters can write everyone else's schedule. He could not load from the standard stance. Sideways to the breech, left hand guiding base, right hand pushing, without leaking seconds and pain. So, in a gesture that began as a flinch and became an idea, he turned his back to the breech, planted his boots wide for balance, reached behind himself with his right arm like a man hooking a heavy suitcase, and used his torso as a lever. The round rose along his thigh, slid past his hip into his right hand, and met the open breech face at the exact angle his shoulder allowed. He pulled with his back, not his ruined joint, slotted brass to steel, and barked, "Up!" Corporal Lewis did not care which way the round had traveled. He cared that the gun could talk. He squeezed. The 75 barked, the hull shrugged, and a Panzer IV at 800 became a new definition for the word halt. The recoil cycle kicked Walter's idea from accidental to repeatable. In that tight moment after the shot, the M3's breech recoiled, extracted, and returned, the cradle hissing, recuperator doing its hydraulic religion. Turrets teach rhythm. Walter matched it. As the breech came back into battery, he was already bringing the next round up backwards along his thigh, presenting base first at the perfect height because his spine, stiff as a rail, set the geometry instead of a shoulder that refused to cooperate. No fumbling to find the 2-inch window where round meets throat. His right hand delivered it like a baton pass. Up. On, said Lewis. Fire! The 2nd Panzer IV stuttered into flame, as if embarrassed by steel's capacity to change temperature that fast. 2 down, the commander said to the radio, with a boredom he had earned the hard way by learning how to sound like calm when other men needed it. The 3rd Panzer tried to angle, showing cheek. 9 degrees of slope are not salvation when a man has solved seconds. Backwards loading was not mystical. It was leverage pretending to be courage, and then agreeing to be procedure for 6 minutes. Walter's stance reduced the awkward swing space inside the turret. In the usual drill, a loader shuffles left, brings the round across open air, pivots shoulder, and pushes. Every bit of that arc costs time in a space where elbows have to ask permission. Turning his back and reaching behind converted push into pull, letting big muscles do what the small, injured joint could not. It also shortened the search for the breech's mouth. Instead of hunting for alignment with a round that wanted to sag out of plane, he used his hip as a traveling shelf, dragging the base along a predictable path that met the throat at a shallower angle. Friction went down, speed went up, pain learned to negotiate. Inside a Sherman, inches matter more than medals. Walter found 6 of them without asking a lieutenant. A loader's art is timing married to housekeeping. The moment the breech block snapped up after extraction, the cradle was ready to swallow again. Recoil ends with opportunity. Delay turns it into accusation. Walter's backward slide brought brass to steel before the opportunity could get cold. He dragged each M61 from the rack with his right hand, base leading, pivoted at the waist, and, this is the part no manual confessed, let the gun meet him. The M3's return stroke sets the breech where it wants to be, not where a loader hopes it will be. By presenting the round on that exact plane, he erased the tiny argument that otherwise lives between almost and home. The barrel did its work. The loader did not dare make it work around him. With his shoulder out, Walter had been forced to learn courtesy toward a machine quicker than peacetime ever teaches. The 3rd shot punished a Panzer that had done its math right, but too late. Corporal Lewis rode the sight like a craftsman on a lathe, letting the fine wheel settle, whispering the crosshair through fog that kept wanting to lie. On, he said, and the commander added, fire. Not because the gunner needed permission, but because the turret needed a metronome. The 75 spat. The loader was already pulling the next round up his thigh, and the driver, blessed Ortiz, rolled the hull 2 feet to the left to foul a German gunner's lead. The 3rd IV hissed steam and smoke, stopped like a punched argument, and nobody in the Sherman cheered because grown men do not argue with gifts while more work is coming. The 4th Panzer tried to reverse into a fold in the ground that had impressed some other lieutenant last spring. Walter's shoulder threatened mutiny. He ignored it the way you ignore a barking dog on a day you cannot afford to be kind. Round up, base home, breech up, up. The gun spoke again. The IV tried to stop existing and then complied. 6 minutes, 4 Panzers. Numbers are tidy. Minutes are not. Radio said other names and other ranges. Another Sherman on the flank counted a fire of its own. The crew inside Walter's turret kept breathing in short, ugly pieces. Good work, the commander said into the intercom. Because praise is a kind of oxygen when a tank has to choose between panic and professionalism. He put his hand on Walter's back for 1 second, and then took it away because the turret is a universe of jobs that hate sentiment while they're being done. "What did you do?" he asked, when there was half a second to waste. "The wrong way," Walter said, and then laughed a broken laugh that sounded like pain letting itself hide in humor for a heartbeat. The commander nodded even though Walter could not see him. "Do it again when we need it," he said. "That's the right way now. Medics find heroes by the way they walk." After the fight stuttered into a lull, a medic crawled over the hull and made Walter sit on the turret ring so that gravity could audition for grace. The shoulder looked wrong. The medic did the ugly arithmetic of field reduction. 1 hand here, 1 hand there, a count that lies deliberately about when the pull will come. Pop. There are noises that make grown men say prayers they didn't think they remembered. "Keep it in a sling," the medic said. "He can't," the commander answered. "He's our loader." The medic had heard answers like that all summer. "Then keep the sling on between racks," he said, "and keep doing whatever wrong thing you did that kept you alive." In another war, a lawyer might have arrived to discuss procedure. In Lorraine, procedure arrived with fog and left with the sun, and left behind only those pieces that fit in a turret. Back at the orchard that doubled as a company CP, the story detached from its owners and learned to travel. Crewmen tell truth with hands before they find words. Walter showed the stance with an empty casing, turning his back to a folding chair used as a mock breech, dragging the base up his thigh, rolling his hip just enough to present, pulling with back, not shoulder. You could see the mechanics of the thing take root in other men's faces. They tried it, laughed at how stupid it felt, then did it again faster and stopped laughing. The gunner from 2nd Platoon, one of those lean men built of angles and suspicion, said, "It keeps the round on plane." He was not a poet. He was correct. A corporal with a scar that had robbed his smile of romance said, "You don't have to hunt the throat." Words like throat and plane started to replace luck in conversations that had too often carried that lazy word. An old loader with 19 months in theater and a wrist that no longer trusted him watched and nodded slowly like a man being offered forgiveness. "Back in Tunisia," he said, "we used to float the base with fingertips. Worked fine until you got scared." Everyone waited for the moral. "This way," he continued, "you let fear live in your legs, not your hands." A lieutenant with the tactical map still printed on his corneas tried the move and clacked his knuckles on the faux breech. He swore softly, and then, like all decent officers forced to admit a sergeant has shown him a thing, said, "Teach it, today." That was doctrine being born without minutes. The physics started to get sentences. The backward stance achieved 3 things at once. It shortened the load path by replacing a wide lateral swing with a compact posterior arc. It lined the base with the breech face early in the movement, reducing hunting time, and it let the loader time his pull to the gun's return stroke, using the recuperator's stop as a reference instead of as a surprise. A 4th thing arrived only in practice. By keeping his body between the round and the turret wall, the loader protected the projectile from glancing and his crew from an accidental slip that could turn brass into bludgeon. Men who had never drawn a free body diagram were, in effect, doing just that with their bones and their caution. The move felt wrong only until it felt inevitable. Word reached battalion, then combat command. Somewhere above, a staff officer wrote a line that tasted like grudging. Field expedient reverse load technique observed to increase rate of fire in M4 turret under certain ergonomic conditions. Advise limited testing. Limited testing in this war meant tell the next company and see if they live. Within days, 3 other crews in Charlie Company were using the backwards load when the shot tempo mattered. The trick fit best when the gunner could hold the sight on without dancing the turret. It failed when the driver bucked the hull at the wrong instant. Teams learned that the move asked for choreography as polite as any dance the war had interrupted. Up, on, fire, up. The words caught a new tempo, less lurch, more drum. Third Army is a rumor that turned itself into movement. When a trick works in one county of Lorraine, it finds a truck to ride to the next. A staff sergeant courier with more miles than credit in his pocket carried the story to a motor pool farther south. Kid with a bad wing loads backwards, 4 Panzers in 6 minutes. Men dismissed the number and kept the method. A loader named Diaz tried it and realized that his short reach no longer doomed him to being almost fast. A big kid from Kansas tried it and discovered that his size, which had always been a liability in the M4's cramp, became an asset when his back took the job his shoulder had done before fatigue made a liar of him. Skeptics remained, mostly men who had survived by worshiping their first instructor's voice. One of them said, "I ain't turning my back on a hot breech." Walter, who by then had earned the right to be impolite, said, "Turn your back on the man trying to kill you, then." The skeptic tried the move under supervision and later refused to admit he had ever doubted it. Arracourt did not pause while doctrine argued with itself. The German armored counterattacks kept feeling for the seams in a fog that turned maps into rumors. In the days after the first backwards load, Walter found himself doing it on purpose rather than under duress. His shoulder, slung between racks, thanked him by remaining a steady ache instead of a siren. The move shaved seconds in places where seconds weren't shaved so much as rescued. The commander started calling ranges with a confidence that came from knowing the next round would arrive on time, even if the turret had to argue with a rut. The gunner, now spoiled, would hold the sight that extra split beat to let the reticle settle because he trusted that UP meant now, not soon. When a Panzer IV cracked through a hedgerow at 600, and threw its first shot high by impatience, the Sherman replied before the German could swallow the mistake. Men who have learned to time success are greedy about timing failure in others. The company held a field school in the only way that matters in a moving war, between fights and maintenance. Loaders lined up beside an M4 with the breech blocked and took turns with inert casings. Backwards load, call up, back to rack, again. A corporal kitted a metronome out of a ticking wristwatch so the timing could be felt. They discovered that each crew had its own music. Some liked the loader to call up as the breech started to rise. The gunner preferred hearing the word as promise. Others liked it a hair later. The gunner preferred up as proof. Both worked as long as men listened to each other with the kind of attention only people in a small metal room can afford. A driver watching from the hull took notes. "I can feel you," he told Walter afterward. "Every time you pull, the tank twitches. I can give you level if you give me a count." They counted together. Level replaced twitch. The tank became a choir. In mess, the hack acquired a nickname, because names glue memory. Someone called it the wrong way load, and someone else, who had been in the Pacific and liked nonchalant bravado, called it the Tokyo turn. It stuck for a day, and then vanished because the European war has its own accent. The term that lasted was simpler: backload. Orders and training notes began to include it in pencil. Backload when rate of fire required. Use standard on move. Men taught each other when not to use it too. When the turret was bouncing, when the rack was low and the loader had to fish, when he was up and two-piece cartridges made the backward stance awkward. Prudence is the twin of innovation. They learned both at once. Word climbed. Third Army's training section sent a captain with a clipboard and an honest face. He asked Walter to demonstrate. Walter did, with a fresh sling and the kind of humility that either precedes pride or hides it. The captain tried the move himself, grimaced at the way his own body had ideas, and then nodded. "It's easier to teach than to explain," he said. "That's rare." He asked about safety. Walter told him the one hazard that mattered. Don't drop it. In a turret, the obvious is also the obituary. The captain wrote fast, then slower, then said, "I'll need to show this to a general who hates being surprised by anything except speed." That was how the hack got on a truck wearing a smile and a signature. Skeptical officers in the artillery section wondered aloud whether any change that increased rate of fire might encourage gunners to waste ammunition. Tankers laughed softly, the way men laugh when told to fear water in a desert. "We waste seconds, not rounds," the commander said. "This saves both." The medical officer who had reduced Walter's shoulder put a hand on the tank's glacis and said, "If he loads like that, he keeps his arm." Doctrine likes arguments that sound like compromises. The hack had both sides, tactical and medical, agreeing for once. That made the next memo easier to sign. The ripple effect didn't stop at improvisation. Third Army's operations circular for early October included a paragraph that might have been written by a staff poet if such a rank existed. In close engagement within 800 yards where rapid fire is decisive, loaders may employ reverse stance for accelerated round presentation, provided safety measures are observed. Commanders will supervise for discipline. Training cadres will include demonstrations. That sentence, stripped of adjectives, smuggled permission into places where permission is usually a controlled substance. Battalion sergeants major, priests of habit, did what they always do when the war itself has issued a mandate. They found the most credible man in each company and had him teach 3 others who could teach 3 more. The hack became a lesson plan that smelled like oil. Numbers began to soften in the right direction. In the fortnight after Arracourt's morning lesson, after-action notes logged instances where backloading shaved engagement time and kept crews alive. The numbers are not clean. War statistics rarely wash up unbloodied. But the trend avoided argument. A staff colonel willing to stick his name to a guess wrote that 300-500 tankers likely spared over present phase by improved fire tempo in first volleys, and then added more carefully, pending better data. The better data would never arrive in a form that satisfied a pedant. The lives arrived in mess lines that were longer than they might have been. Letters home postponed are measurable only by calendars, and even those are shy. The men in the turrets did not require a bar chart to keep doing the thing that turned seconds into tomorrow. Walter did not become famous. He became busy. He spent hours in motor pools, hours and sometimes theirs when units overlapped, showing the stance, correcting hips, tapping shins with the casual authority of a man who is allowed to touch other men's bones because those bones belong to the same profession. He developed a quiet checklist that lived in his head and then moved to mimeograph. Right foot forward, half a boot length, knees soft, round base on thigh, slide up, pull on return, call up when breech kisses home. He never told anyone to hurt themselves. He told them to make the gun love them by meeting it where it lived. Inside the turret, the hack changed job's edges. The gunner stopped chasing the sight because he knew the next round would land as predictably as a tide. The commander stopped over-talking because he could feel the tempo through the deck. The driver kept the hull truer between micro-moves because each shot no longer knocked the crew's timing out of alignment. The assistant driver choked radio op, the least glamorous seat in the crew, found that his calls to other tanks could be shorter because more work was being done per breath. A Sherman is a family arguing in a tin kitchen. The backload replaced argument with cadence for the 1 minute that mattered most. The Germans adjusted, because enemies listen even when fog makes eavesdropping hard. Panzer crews pushed smoke, launchers spitting cover that turned crosshairs into guesses. Backloading helped here too, because the first 2 or 3 rounds land before smoke thickens into audacity. A Panther at 900 is still the kind of problem that makes a 75mm feel underdressed, but a Panzer IV at 800 that expected an American hesitation learned to mistrust its expectation. The hack did not grant invulnerability. It granted initiative. On mornings when fog tried to steal that, Walter stole it back with his spine. Somewhere behind the front, in a tent with better paper, a general who enjoyed speed as both metaphor and diet read the paragraph his captain had carried and underlined the parts that sounded like movement. He added his initials and a line that said, "In war, there is no wrong way that kills the enemy and preserves our men." Patton's staff sent the message with more formality, but the spirit leaked through. Crews read the line and laughed. It is not often that headquarters speaks your dialect. Rumor says that doctrine became film. A Signal Corps team shot a short reel in late October showing the backload sequence with a calm narrator who turned sweat into pedagogy. In the reel, the loader faces away, slides the round up his thigh, presents, pulls, calls up, and steps to rack with a neatness that borders on dance. A second sequence shows when not to do it. Turret movement, rough hull, loader too short for the rack. The camera lingers on hands because hands are the plot in a turret. Units rotated through training areas, saw the film, tried the motion with dummies, and then returned to the war where the first seconds on target decided whether anyone would ever remember the film. When the bulge came, it did not ask for permission to break schedules. Some crews forgot backloading in the jolt of discovery. Snow where October had promised mud. Tigers where rumors had promised panzers. Others did it without thinking. Muscle memory now living where fear once stored its spare keys. Walter wrote a letter home he never sent about what it felt like to have a body learn a trick out of pain, and then keep it out of respect. He described the way a turret shrinks under cold and grows under smoke. the way a loader's breath has to choose between frosting the sight and keeping a rhythm. He did not mention ruins or children because letters have to be lighter than the truth to cross oceans. The war's end did not end the argument between physics and procedure. In Korea, tank crews in Pershings and Pattons inherited the idea without remembering its origin. Old sergeants showed young loaders that the gun lives on a plane and that your job is to meet the plane without making drama. Some tanks had rammers that assisted. Some had loaders whose wrists were poetry. All had seconds that could be saved or destroyed. In Vietnam, M48 and M60 crews found that while the turret had grown and the rounds had become heavier and the assist systems had opinions, there were still moments when a backward stance and a spine could turn a hesitation into a habit of survival. Training films adopted the sanitized language of officialdom. Alternative loading presentation may be used when conditions warrant. On ranges, instructors with a grandfather's smile said, "Here's how the old men did it when the world was fog." The phrase carried neither romance nor derision. It carried a promise that the body will remember what it learns the hard way. Walter left the army with a shoulder that predicted rain better than any weatherman. He took a job that had nothing to do with guns and everything to do with timing. He fixed elevators. He liked the way cables and counterweights talked back with honesty. He taught his apprentices to meet the machine where it lived and not force it into the fantasy angle in a manual photograph. He told exactly 2 stories from the war to men who needed them. One was about a Panzer that kept a promise to explode where physics said it would. The other was about the day pain gave him an idea that saved other men so quietly that no one learned to spell his name for a newspaper. He never watched the Signal Corps film. He did keep a spent M61 base plug on his desk, a dumb piece of brass with no moral except the one it knew by being what it was. Weight that had been aimed well. Arracourt's fields look patient now. If you walk them in the morning, fog will still pretend to own the place. You can kneel and touch dirt that has memorized tracks, though it will not admit it. The distances are still there, 800 yards in any direction if you squint. The hedgerow stumps are softer. Cows do not know what a breech is, which is the correct lesson for a cow. Somewhere under your boot is the exact place where a loader turned his back on a problem and faced a solution. If you're lucky, you'll hear the echo of a P inside your own ribs. You'll stand and think about leverage and mercy and the geometry of survival. Then you will walk, which is the most underrated thing any war story can leave you able to do. There were, of course, men who said the hack was dangerous even after it had saved their friends. That is not hypocrisy. It is longing for a world in which perfection is an option. A cautious master gunner ran trials on a quiet afternoon. He timed a standard load cycle, call it 3 to 4 seconds under calm, 5 to 6 in battle breathing, against the backload. The backload shaved 1.5 seconds on average when the turret was steady and the loader had the move. He wrote it down with the defensive tone of a man who knows time is not a toy. He added that under rough motion, the advantage disappeared and safety margins narrowed. That line saved lives, too, by keeping zealots from turning a clever hack into a religion. The war has too many religions already. One night, the crew bivouacked in a barn whose wood had held other armies' breath. Lewis, the gunner who had turned fog into arithmetic, asked Walter what the first moment had felt like. Walter shrugged carefully. "It felt like not dying yet," he said. He went quiet, then added, "It felt like the gun helping me instead of me helping the gun." Lewis kept his eyes on the dark. "That's all I ever wanted," he said, and the sentence was so simple that everyone let it be the last for the day. Men who have earned sleep do not wrestle with philosophy when hay is warm and tomorrow is not promised. If you care about the body, you might wonder how a dislocated shoulder kept working. The truth is impolite. Adrenaline adds lies to ligaments. Pain recuses itself until the vice loosens. The shoulder that could not push could still anchor a rope made of spine and thigh and grip. Walter rebuilt the load path around the weakness without a diagram, because the diagram was inside him. Later, when medics forced him out for a week and then a month, other loaders kept the stance alive, not because it was a monument, but because it was useful. That's all the immortality most good ideas get, and all they require. Tankers tell time by the color of their stories. The Arracourt morning is gray in memory. Fog, metal, the brief orange of burns healing. The hack's color, if you forced a crayon on it, is the dull brass of casings that rolled under boots. In every mess after, where men reassemble themselves with food and mockery, the sentence came out eventually. Remember when Walt loaded the wrong way? A hand would show the motion. Another hand would show the recoil. The driver would tap the table twice to imitate the hull shift he learned to give to keep the plane honest. The commander would say nothing and smile because commanders are supposed to collect words, not spend them, but sometimes a smile is a proper currency. The Army has a bureaucracy designed to forget what it cannot measure. Sometimes it remembers by accident because the people who lived the measurement refuse to die. In training circulars after the war, buried near diagrams of ammunition cross-sections and cleaning rods, a line appears. Alternate loader stance may be used to expedite loading when physical limitation or tactical necessity require. The sentence owes Walter money it will never pay. He never sent a bill. He had decided long before that the debt was already settled by those 6 minutes. In museums where children push buttons, some Shermans wear placards that turn chaos into paragraphs. None of them talk about backloading. That's fine. The turret is a secret most people are not built to hold. Air that smells like cordite and sweat. Officers who talk like radios and radios that talk like officers. The way your teeth buzz on the shot if you forget to open your mouth. If you know, you know. If you don't, you can still stand at the hull and feel for scuffs where boots made a path from racks to breech and back. Somewhere in those scuffs is a backwards turn that earned an inch of life from a machine that likes obedience too much to admit it learned something that day from a man. If we are compelled to give the last word to the numbers, let us be honest about their appetite. 4 Panzers, 6 minutes. These are round numbers that tempt the tidy mind. The truth sat inside those minutes like a core you can bite and still not name. A loader found a stance that let him make a gun do what it already wanted to do. Talk when asked, not later. Other loaders copied it. Other crews lived. A general who loved speed turned a shrug into a policy. Training slowed the trick into repeatable pieces and then sped it back up into instinct. Across the months that followed, A few hundred men who would have been buried instead returned home to write postcards from places whose names didn't make their mothers cry. You may insist on proving that with ledgers. We will insist on believing it with the evidence of empty chairs that did not stay empty. The Arracourt fields will hold fog long after the last veteran forgets his own voice. The hedges will pretend to be innocent. The ranges will still be what they are. And somewhere near a low rise, if you stand quiet and let the morning carry, you might hear the choreography of a fight that chose to be a lesson. 2 o'clock, 800, AP up. The loader, back to the breech, head turned just enough to keep the world in the corner of an eye, sliding around up a thigh that knows the weight of decisions, calling up at the exact moment steel and intent meet. The gunner, letting the reticle settle into its habit of being right. The commander, a metronome who refuses panic its favorite trick. The driver, a whisper of track as the hull becomes accomplice rather than jury. The shot, the recoil, the return, again, until 6 minutes have become a ledger of choices that do not ask for applause because their dividend is breath. And breath is the only thing any of them ever wanted from a morning like that. What the manuals could never say, and what the body knew instantly, is simple. The shortest path between a shell and a breech is the one your bones can repeat under fear. Walter found that path by accident and kept it on purpose. The Army, to its credit, borrowed his accident and turned it into permission. The war, to its lack of credit, supplied enough mornings like Arracourt to make the permission worthwhile. The rest is details, angles and inches, and the color of fog. The rest is also everything. 4 Panzers, 6 minutes, a loader with a shoulder that still aches when the weather remembers. Somewhere, an elevator stops at the right floor because a man who once learned to meet machines where they live wouldn't let it do otherwise. Somewhere, a child hears a story about the wrong way and learns the best kind of disobedience, the kind that answers to survival and owes apologies to no one who didn't bleed for it. If you must translate the whole episode into one line of doctrine, let it be this: procedures exist to serve physics, not to deny it. In the Sherman that morning, physics had the last word, about leverage, about arcs and planes, about how a recoil cycle gives you a window, and how a loader's spine can be the simplest kind of machine. The wrong way is only wrong until it's the only way that works. After that, it's the standard by which men quietly measure the next idea that wants to live. And if we are lucky, the next loader who needs it will find his body remembering faster than his fear can argue. If you must translate the whole episode into one line of doctrine, let it be this: procedures exist to serve physics, not to deny it. In the Sherman that morning, physics had the last word, about leverage, about arcs and planes, about how a recoil cycle gives you a window, and how a loader's spine can be the simplest kind of machine. The wrong way is only wrong until it's the only way that works. After that, it's the standard by which men quietly measure the next idea that wants to live. And if we are lucky, the next loader who needs it will find his body remembering faster than his fear can argue. If you must translate the whole episode into one line of doctrine, let it be this: procedures exist to serve physics, not to deny it. In the Sherman that morning, physics had the last word, about leverage, about arcs and planes, about how a recoil cycle gives you a window, and how a loader's spine can be the simplest kind of machine. The wrong way is only wrong until it's the only way that works. After that, it's the standard by which men quietly measure the next idea that wants to live. And if we are lucky, the next loader who needs it will find his body remembering faster than his fear can argue. If you must translate the whole episode into one line of doctrine, let it be this: procedures exist to serve physics, not to deny it. In the Sherman that morning, physics had the last word. About leverage, about arcs and planes, about how a recoil cycle gives you a window, and how a loader's spine can be the simplest kind of machine. The wrong way is only wrong until it's the only way that works. After that, it's the standard by which men quietly measure the next idea that wants to live. And if we are lucky, the next loader who needs it will find his body remembering faster than his fear can argue. If you must translate the whole episode into one line of doctrine, let it be this: procedures exist to serve physics, not to deny it. In the Sherman that morning, physics had the last word. About leverage, about arcs and planes, about how a recoil cycle gives you a window, and how a loader's spine can be the simplest kind of machine. The wrong way is only wrong until it's the only way that works. After that, it's the standard by which men quietly measure the next idea that wants to live. And if we are lucky, the next loader who needs it will find his body remembering faster than his fear can argue. If you must translate the whole episode into one line of doctrine, let it be this: procedures exist to serve physics, not to deny it. In the Sherman that morning, physics had the last word. About leverage, about arcs and planes, about how a recoil cycle gives you a window, and how a loader's spine can be the simplest kind of machine. The wrong way is only wrong until it's the only way that works. After that, it's the standard by which men quietly measure the next idea that wants to live. And if we are lucky, the next loader who needs it will find his body remembering faster than his fear can argue. If you must translate the whole episode into one line of doctrine, let it be this: procedures exist to serve physics, not to deny it. In the Sherman that morning, physics had the last word. About leverage, about arcs and planes, about how a recoil cycle gives you a window, and how a loader's spine can be the simplest kind of machine. The wrong way is only wrong until it's the only way that works. After that, it's the standard by which men quietly measure the next idea that wants to live. And if we are lucky, the next loader who needs it will find his body remembering faster than his fear can argue. If you must translate the whole episode into one line of doctrine, let it be this: procedures exist to serve physics, not to deny it. In the Sherman that morning, physics had the last word. About leverage, about arcs and planes, about how a recoil cycle gives you a window, and how a loader's spine can be the simplest kind of machine. The wrong way is only wrong until it's the only way that works. After that, it's the standard by which men quietly measure the next idea that wants to live. And if we are lucky, the next loader who needs it will find his body remembering faster than his fear can argue.